Welcome, God's chosen ones. Take a breath and let this truth settle into your spirit. The moment you stopped reacting, they started malfunctioning. Not just a little irritated, not just confused, but straight up furious. You shattered their illusion with something as simple, as powerful, as holy as your silence. You see, in every room where a manipulator once reigned supreme, it was your withdrawal that flipped the entire atmosphere. Your refusal to respond the way they predicted became a thunderclap in their echo chamber. They were counting on your confusion, your guilt, your need to be understood, and you took all three away like a divine thief in the night. And now they're scrambling, short-circuiting, because they can't access you anymore. You didn't just walk away. You ascended. You unplugged the entire game and tossed the controller right back at them with a smile. Can we pause for a second? Because I want to thank each and every one of you who has supported this mission through Super Thanks. Your gifts aren't just donations, they are fuel. They are seeds. And they are sacred reminders that this message is reaching the very people it was created for. Your love sustains this space. And whether you've donated or not, I want you to know, I'm so grateful you're here. You being here means you're chosen. You watching this means your spirit is awakening to something eternal. You didn't stumble across this, you were led here. So let's talk about it. Why are they so furious? Why does your presence, your peace, your ability to stand still in the face of chaos, enrage them more than anything else? Because manipulators thrive in chaos. They need you off balance. They need you second-guessing your every move. But you flipped the script. You saw through the fake apologies, the selective memory, the emotional bait. You didn't explain yourself. You didn't retaliate. You didn't chase closure. You let God handle it, and that is what burns them the most. And here's the kicker. They were never prepared for someone like you, someone who has discernment, someone who doesn't crumble when falsely accused, someone who walks away with dignity instead of staying for validation. That's why they're rewriting the story, playing the victim, gossiping behind closed doors, because the only way they can feel powerful again is to paint you as the villain they could never conquer. So stay right here, chosen one, because in this video, we're going deeper than surface drama. We're unpacking the root of their rage, the truth behind their tactics, and why their tricks will never touch you again. And before we go any further, drop a 777 in the comments if you know this message is confirmation from heaven. 777, divine completion. Let the algorithms and the adversaries know you're not the same person they used to manipulate. You've been upgraded. You've been anointed. And this time, you're untouchable. Let's begin. God's chosen ones. They're furious. Their manipulation can't touch you anymore. Number 1. You refuse to be confused, so they can't control the narrative. Chosen one. The very reason they're so rattled right now is because you've broken free from their oldest and most effective tool, confusion. That fog they used to cast around you, those subtle distractions, half-truths, passive-aggressive tones, and emotional traps. They all depended on one thing, your hesitation to trust what you saw. But now, you see clearly, and that clarity is spiritual warfare. It's not just that you don't fall for the games anymore, it's that you don't even entertain them. And for manipulators, that's terrifying. They can't stand that you no longer question your own gut. They can't control the narrative anymore because you no longer need their interpretation of events to validate what you already know to be true. Why does your silence bother them more than your words ever did? Because your peace is no longer performative. It's rooted. You no longer feel the urge to over-explain, over-apologize, or play dumb to make others comfortable. And now that you're no longer emotionally entangled, they've lost the one thing they truly depended on, your inner instability. They never had power. What they had was fog, illusion, and enough manipulation to keep you just disoriented enough to follow their lead. But now that you've stepped into divine clarity, the fog has lifted. You don't react out of fear. You respond with facts. You ask questions that corner their lies. You watch instead of perform. You observe rather than obey. God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. 1 Corinthians 14:33. Think about Daniel in Babylon. When all the king's wise men panicked, Daniel calmly sought God and spoke with clarity, not confusion. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He asked for time, received divine insight, and revealed the truth. Daniel 2:14-23. That's what you've done. When everyone else bought the illusion, you paused and said, "Wait, something's off." Your spiritual vision ruined the illusion. And once the illusion breaks, so does their influence. People like Edward Snowden exposed massive systems of manipulation, not through aggression, but through clarity. He revealed truths hidden in plain sight, and it sent governments into panic. The same spiritual energy lives in you. You're no longer falling for emotional distractions meant to reroute your attention from what's really going on. And isn't it interesting how the more focused you become, the more chaotic they get? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. They hate that you don't jump at the bait anymore. They throw out sarcasm wrapped in smiles. They act like victims when they're confronted. They create chaos and then pretend to be confused by your distance. But you, chosen one, don't take the bait. Why should you? You've stopped trying to defend your name to people committed to misunderstanding it. You've matured beyond their reach. Their emotional fishing lines come back, empty now. Why does your refusal to fight shake them so deeply? Because they built the whole performance around your participation. Oprah Winfrey faced waves of media attacks and betrayals, but she never let herself be ruled by confusion. She once said, "You become what you believe." And because she believed she was worthy of peace, she stopped chasing clarity from those who tried to withhold it. You've done the same. You no longer ask liars to confirm your truth. You no longer seek clarity from the very people who thrive in ambiguity. You carry the light now, and that's why the shadows scatter when you enter the room. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Have you noticed how manipulative people try to gaslight you after you've already called it out? They say things like, "You're reading too much into it," or "You're being sensitive." But something in your spirit knows better. You used to second-guess yourself. Now, you stand in your discernment. And that discernment is the death of their deception. Why do they get angry when you simply ask, "Can you explain that again?" It's because the second you require clarity, their manipulation has to collapse. Manipulators don't operate in light. They operate in loopholes, silence, and fear. You've stepped out of that maze. When Malala Yousafzai refused to be silenced by extremists who thrived in suppressing truth and clarity, she didn't just speak up. She exposed an entire culture of manipulation. She's a reminder that even a quiet, consistent voice can bring empires of confusion to their knees. You are walking in that same spirit, and don't you forget it. The discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly. Proverbs 15:14, even in pop culture. We've seen people like Meghan Markle break away from curated narratives designed to control how she was seen. Her interviews weren't just stories, they were revelations. She didn't yell. She revealed, just like you're not angry. You're aware. And that awareness is louder than any insult they could throw. Have you ever wondered why your stillness triggers their chaos? Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Matthew Esser, Shesh Esra, Britney Spears also lived this reality for years. Her confusion was manufactured until she spoke out. When she reclaimed her narrative, the system cracked. Why? Because once a person sees clearly, manipulation no longer works. You've had the same awakening, and now, their tactics don't just fail, they reveal them. They expose who's who. They show who needs fog to function and who can stand in the light. So here's the final question. What happens when a manipulator loses access to your confusion, your guilt, your reactions, and your silence? They lose everything. And that's exactly why they're furious now. You don't need them to decode reality anymore. You've turned the light on. You've become the light. And once the light is on, chosen one, the roaches scatter. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Ephesians 5-8. Number 2. Your emotional discipline blocks their entry points. God's chosen one. What terrifies them now isn't just your awareness, it's your emotional restraint. Before, they used your emotions like handles to move you wherever they wanted. They'd poke, prod, and whisper just the right insult, knowing it would trigger a spiral of reaction. But now they're dealing with someone grounded, someone who feels deeply but doesn't act impulsively, someone whose peace can't be hijacked, and that makes you completely inaccessible to their manipulation. Why do you think they're trying harder than ever to provoke you? Manipulators thrive in emotional chaos. They're most powerful when you're least centered. Their ideal environment is when you're crying, shouting, over-explaining, or questioning your own stability. They don't need you to be wrong. They just need you to feel too overwhelmed to notice they're wrong. But you've flipped the script. You've matured. You no longer hand over your reactions like free currency. And because of that, their strategies fall flat. They say something off expecting an explosion, and instead, you pause. You observe. You breathe. That one pause dismantles an entire manipulation cycle. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. Proverbs 29:11. Have you ever wondered why they seem more reactive now that you're not? Why their temper gets shorter the more calm you become? It's because you've become a wall they can't climb. Your self-control blocks every emotional door they use to sneak through. The guilt trips bounce off. The gaslighting loops break apart. Their tactics no longer reach your center. And they're furious because their favorite weapon, emotional chaos, no longer works. Look at Michelle Obama. Throughout her public life, she was often attacked with racial and personal jabs designed to get a reaction. But she always responded with poise, wisdom, and clarity. She even said, "When they go low, they go high." That's not just a slogan. It's spiritual warfare, and it's exactly what you're doing now. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control. Galatians 5:22-23. They don't understand it. To them, silence must mean coldness. Calm must mean indifference. But your emotional discipline isn't about shutting down. It's about choosing peace over performative outrage. It's about knowing when a response is needed and when it's a trap. Emotional discipline is not the absence of feeling. It's the maturity to feel fully, without letting those feelings dictate your behavior. Let's be honest, how many times have they tried the same old tricks? Passive-aggressive remarks, backhanded compliments, the silent treatment, sudden explosions over nothing, and yet, every time they tried to push your buttons, you responded with steady vision. You didn't get pulled into defending yourself to someone who already made up their mind. You didn't beg for clarity from someone who intentionally created confusion. You just observed. And that observation disrupted everything. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Proverbs 16:32. Consider Taylor Swift. In her earlier years, she often reacted publicly to betrayal and criticism. But with time, she stopped handing people her emotional power. Instead, she created music, art, and empire-level moves in silence. You're walking in that same shift. The more you grow, the less reactive you become. The less reactive you are, the more power you retain. Why give emotional fuel to people who want to burn you with it? And let me ask you this, why do they suddenly call you cold now that you're calm? Could it be that they were never prepared for you to stop leaking emotional access? They wanted you to break down, cry, scream, because then you were distracted and they were in control. But now you see the whole map. You see the trap before it springs. You've learned that you can feel triggered without reacting recklessly. You can be sad and still sit in silence. You can be confused and still choose patience. That's real power. That's what they fear. He will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in him. Isaiah 26:3. Think of Chadwick Boseman, a man who carried unfathomable emotional and physical battles behind the scenes, but remained a symbol of grace, purpose, and discipline. Even in suffering, he didn't allow the world to manipulate his narrative. His quiet strength is a mirror of your own. You no longer wear your wounds on your sleeve. You carry them as proof of your healing. And what happens when manipulators can no longer get a reaction from you? They start reacting to you. They twist your calm into coldness, your strength into stubbornness, your discipline into detachment. But deep down, they know it's not that you don't feel. It's that you're no longer controlled by how you feel. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:21. Rihanna. 2. Shifted from emotional responses to empire-building silence. After public heartbreaks and betrayals, she stopped feeding public narratives and started building private power. That's what you've chosen now. You've stopped defending yourself to chaos. You've stopped handing over the keys to your peace. And that version of you, that emotionally stable, spiritually grounded version, they don't know how to manipulate that. Let's reflect a little deeper. Why does your peace seem to offend people who used to control your storms? Why does your stillness look like resistance to those who once thrived on your chaos? What have you protected by refusing to react the way they expected? Isn't it strange how powerful silence can be in the face of provocation? Could it be that your new discipline is showing them their lack of self-control? The wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Proverbs 10:14. So now they project, they accuse, they fumble, but none of that changes the fact that you've built walls they can't scale. You've reclaimed the gates to your inner world. Your peace is no longer up for negotiation. You are no longer emotionally hijacked, and that, chosen one, is why you're a threat. Because when you're no longer reactive, you become a mirror, And what they see in that mirror is their own powerlessness, and they can't handle it. Number 3. You don't seek belonging where you're being controlled. God's chosen one of your greatest acts of spiritual power, was walking away from environments that demanded your silence as the price of acceptance. That was the move they never expected. They assumed that your longing to belong would make you blind to the way they were controlling you. They believed you would tolerate manipulation in exchange for being included, but you shocked them. You chose truth over tribe, freedom over fitting in, and your soul over their system. And that single choice unraveled everything they built around keeping you in line. Why do you think they grew so obsessed the moment you walked away? Most people stay trapped, not because they're weak, but because they're terrified of being left out. They'll stay in circles where they're constantly disrespected, gaslit, and spiritually drained just to feel like they're part of something. You've probably seen it. Friends tolerating abuse in social groups, employees enduring toxic workplaces just to keep their position, even family members who keep the peace by keeping their mouths shut. Why do so many settle for peace that poisons them? Because they believe being rejected means they're unworthy. But you woke up to the deeper truth. You realize that anywhere you have to shrink to stay present isn't a place of safety, it's a trap. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. When they saw that you didn't need the crowd, the image, or the applause, they panicked. They knew your independence was dangerous. You weren't waiting to be chosen by them. You were already chosen by God. And when your identity is rooted in divine acceptance, human manipulation loses all power. You're not desperate to be seen anymore, because you've been seen by the one who matters. That's what rattled their entire system. They can't offer validation as bait when you no longer need their approval to feel real. Consider Lady Gaga, who has long been criticized for not fitting into the entertainment industry's conventional mold. She was misunderstood, mocked, and told she was too much. But she never sought permission to be herself. She built her own stage. You're doing the same thing. You stopped begging to sit at tables that were never meant to nourish your soul in the first place. And now, the very people who wanted to control you can only watch as you thrive without their permission. If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. Let me ask you, what's the price of belonging when the cost is your voice? Have you ever felt like you had to water down your truth just to stay welcome? That's what they were counting on. They assumed you'd keep biting your tongue, minimizing your light, staying small so others could feel comfortable. But you broke that mold. You chose discomfort over deception. And when you did, they lost the power to control you. Prince Harry walked away from a royal system that prioritized appearance over well-being. The moment he chose truth over tradition, the world shook. And while some ridiculed him, many saw something deeper: freedom. You've made the same trade. You didn't lose community. You escaped control. And now you can see the whole table clearly, poison and all. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1. Why do they still try to paint you as the outcast? Because your absence exposes the toxicity they've normalized. And here's the twist. They know you didn't leave because you couldn't handle the heat. You left because you outgrew the cage. Now that you're not playing their game, you can finally see how rigged it was from the start. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's what terrifies them. You've stepped outside their approval matrix. You've unplugged. Dave Chappelle, one of the most respected comedians of our time, famously walked away from a $50 million deal when he realized it came with a system that wanted to control his voice. He said no, and in doing so, he gained something far more valuable, his soul. You're walking in that same wisdom now. You've stopped selling your voice for their version of peace. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? Galatians 1:10. So let me ask you again, whose approval did you really lose? Manipulators who saw you as a pawn? Or people who now have to question the system you escaped from? The truth is, you didn't walk away from belonging. You walked into authenticity, and once you taste real alignment, manipulation feels cheap and obvious. You've chosen integrity over inclusion. And that's the boldest form of liberation. You're not just free, you're dangerous, because you can't be bribed with acceptance when you've already been accepted by God. Number 4. They can't exploit you because you see the pattern before the play. Chosen one. Your ability to see the game before it begins is not just insight, it's divine discernment. You've lived through enough spiritual battles to know how manipulation works. It's no longer about being blindsided. It's about seeing the bait before you ever reach for it. You've grown too wise, too alert, and too trained in spiritual warfare to be fooled by the same traps. That's what frustrates them. You no longer need to be burned before recognizing the fire. You smell the smoke, see the lighter, and exit before they even strike the match. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Proverbs 7:20. Have you ever asked yourself why they get angry when you bring up a concern before it becomes a crisis? It's because they were counting on your delay. Manipulators love when you wait. They count on your hope that things will get better. Your loyalty, your belief in people's potential. But now you've learned to trust patterns over promises. You've learned to trust what people show, not what they say. And that awareness makes you immune to deception. Think of Rosa Parks, who didn't wait for permission or consensus. She recognized the pattern of injustice and disrupted it by making one clear choice. You've done the same. You're no longer willing to ride the whole route just to prove you were right to get off. You exit early. You move on time. That kind of spiritual timing is prophetic and powerful. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Hebrews 5:14. You used to be the one who gave too many chances, the one who over-explained, the one who waited to see the full disaster before admitting it was a setup, but now you decode the script in Act 1. You no longer fall for performance. You feel the energy shift before words are spoken. One odd pause, one calculated compliment, one twisted joke, and you're already re-evaluating the whole situation. Is it paranoia? No, it's preparation. Why should you wait to be betrayed when your spirit already knows the direction? Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Ahat John Erber. Ahat. Serena Williams has often spoken about trusting her intuition during matches and in life. She doesn't just play the ball, she anticipates the player. You're doing the same. You don't just react to behavior, you anticipate the manipulation. And when they realize they can't get past your spiritual radar, they panic. Let me ask you this. How many times did you ignore your intuition in the past because you didn't want to assume the worst? And how many of those times ended with you picking up broken pieces that someone else caused? Not anymore. You don't wait for disaster to prove your point. You take your peace and go. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Matthew 20:40. Take Brené Brown. For instance, she teaches that setting boundaries is an act of compassion not just toward others, but toward yourself. You've learned that early boundaries are protection, not punishment, and manipulators hate boundaries they can't breach. They hate when their subtle patterns are exposed before they even get started. So let me leave you with this question. What happens when a manipulator meets someone who knows the next move before they make it? The answer is simple. The game ends. You've ended it. And in ending it, you've exposed not just the manipulation, but the manipulator. And now they don't just fear your resistance, they fear your insight. For we are not unaware of his schemes. 2 Corinthians 2:11. Number 5. Your integrity isn't negotiable. And that kills their leverage, God's chosen one. The moment you made your integrity non-negotiable was the moment manipulation lost its grip. What most people don't realize is that manipulators don't need to break you, just bend you. A little compromise here, a little silence there, a little justification to keep the peace. That's their system. But when they came to you expecting flexibility and found a spiritual wall, they didn't just lose leverage, they lost access. Why do you think they're so reactive to your calm refusal to play along? Manipulators rely on the idea that everyone has a price: praise, power, position, even fear. They use all of it to see if you'll bite. But you're not playing the game for attention, status, revenge, or validation. You've been through enough to know that if you betray yourself to keep something, you'll never have peace while holding it. They dangled inclusion, favors, secrets, false loyalty, expecting you to grab for it. But you didn't. You were anchored in something they couldn't imitate. Conviction. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Proverbs 11:3. Let me ask you, how many times in the past did you sacrifice your voice just to avoid conflict? How many rooms did you stay in, knowing your soul was uneasy? Those were your training grounds. That's where your current integrity was forged, not in ease, but in fire. You've said yes when you should have said no. You've kept quiet when your spirit was screaming, and you learned the hard way. Compromising for peace only creates a different kind of war, an internal one. That pain built your standard. That pain birthed your clarity. Take Simone Biles, for example. When she prioritized her mental health over Olympic expectations, the world had mixed reactions, but she stood firm. She knew that sacrificing herself even for a medal wasn't worth losing her soul. That's what you've come to understand. Your values aren't flexible for comfort or applause. You'd rather walk alone in truth than sit at a table where the cost is your conscience. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Matthew 16:26. Now, when they come to pull your strings, they find nothing to grab. They can't flatter you, guilt you, or bait you. Why? Because your no isn't just a word, it's a declaration. I know who I am. And that terrifies people who've only ever moved others through manipulation. They'll say you're stubborn. They'll call you proud. But what they're really saying is, you can't be moved like the rest. And that's the truth. They're not angry you said no. They're angry you meant it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg stood firm for justice and principle, even when it made her unpopular in certain circles. Her life was marked by clarity, not compromise. You're carrying that same unwavering spirit now. While others yield for favor, you stand. Because your integrity doesn't move with the wind. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Matthew 5:30. What happens when you no longer need what they're offering? What do manipulators do when the carrot no longer tempts you and the stick no longer scares you? They collapse. Because their whole game depends on you wanting something bad enough to give in. And when they realize your soul is not for sale, their whole strategy crumbles. You've removed the bargaining chips. Malcolm X once said, "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." Your life now reflects that standard. You don't blur your boundaries to be liked. You don't trade your truth for safety. And that's why they can't touch you. You don't just have power, you have authority rooted in uncompromising values. The righteous who walks in his integrity, blessed are his children after him. Proverbs 20:7. So let me ask you this final question. When your no is backed by peace, not pride, what power do they really have over you? The answer is none, and that's what they can't imitate, manipulate, or defeat. Number 6. You know the power of saying no without explaining yourself. Chosen one. There's a power few ever master, but you have the ability to say no without guilt, panic, or over-explaining. That's the kind of authority that shakes a manipulator to their core. They're used to people justifying, explaining, softening every boundary they try to set. But you say no. And it stands, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. And clarity, to manipulators, is terrifying. Why do you think your silence rattles them more than your words ever did? You've probably been that person before, the one who over-explained everything, hoping to be understood. You wanted to be respectful, kind, compassionate. You didn't want to hurt feelings or burn bridges, so you explained. And every time you did, they twisted your reasons, manipulated your kindness, and weaponized your empathy. You were handing them the manual on how to guilt you, but not anymore. You've learned the lesson. Over-explaining is an invitation for exploitation. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. James 5:10. Now, your boundaries are quiet but unshakable. You no longer feel the need to convince someone that your boundary is valid, because you know this truth. People who respect you won't require 10 paragraphs to accept your limits. And those who don't respect you won't be satisfied no matter how detailed your explanation is. So you stopped giving them emotional access to twist. You stopped performing for approval. That's not distance, it's protection. Naomi Osaka, the tennis champion, chose not to participate in post-match interviews to protect her mental health. She didn't offer elaborate excuses, just a firm boundary. And the backlash was immediate, but the message was louder. My peace is more important than your expectations. You've embodied that same wisdom. You no longer open doors, you've spiritually closed. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. Proverbs 25:28. Let me ask you, how often did you feel emotionally exhausted, not from the boundary itself, but from explaining it? That drain is gone now, because your no is clean, direct, unapologetic, not rude, not cruel, just final. And finality is something manipulators don't know how to navigate. They want an opening, a crack, a loophole, but your stillness has become their wall. Zainab Salbi, founder of Women for Women International, once said, "I stopped explaining myself the day I realized people only understand from their level of perception." That realization changed how you operate. You've stopped handing explanations to those who never intended to understand you. and instead, you walk with clarity and peace. Do not speak in the hearing of a fool, for he will despise the good sense of your words. Proverbs 23:9. Now they say you've changed, that you're distant, that you've become unbothered. But the truth is they're not used to being denied without a door left cracked open. Your calm no is more disruptive than any argument. And in that silence, they feel something they've avoided for a long time: powerlessness. Not because you yelled, not because you slammed a door, but because you simply closed it. Quietly. Greta Thunberg, the young climate activist, often answers critics with action rather than explanation. She doesn't debate with every critic, because when you stand in truth, you don't chase understanding, you live it. That's your energy now. You're not here to justify your peace. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 5:13. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you never again explained your no to someone who already crossed your boundary? That's the power you've stepped into, and that's why they're scrambling, because the game doesn't just end with a shout. It ends in quiet clarity. And you, chosen one, have mastered it. Number 7. They're used to leading blind followers you see with inner vision. God's chosen one. The reason they're so unsettled by you is because you're not a blind follower. You never were. They're used to leading people who only see the surface, who follow charm, status, polished language, and carefully curated masks. But you walk in and feel the frequency. You don't just listen to what's said, you notice what's missing. You don't need evidence to know something is off. You've been spiritually trained to detect deception in its subtlest forms, and that makes you unmanageable in their world of illusion. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 6:7. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt the performance before the speech even began? That's your gift in action. They hate that you don't need them to slip up for you to see the truth. You saw it before they finished their first sentence. Your discernment moves faster than their masks. That's why they avoid you or obsess over you. Either way, they know they can't hide around you. And when a manipulator meets someone who sees clearly, their power evaporates. Look at Anthony Bourdain, who saw through the shiny veneer of culture, media, and politics. He went behind the image and told stories that exposed reality. You're walking in that same spirit. You don't chase lights and applause. You move by alignment. And that's terrifying to people who thrive on convincing crowds they're more pure than they actually are. Test all things. Hold fast to what is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Why do they react so strongly when you say nothing at all? Because your silence isn't confusion, it's clarity. You're not fooled by status or title. You don't follow someone because others do. You don't praise someone because they're loud. You're not loyal to personas, you're loyal to truth. And manipulators can't work with that. Their entire strategy depends on followers who are too distracted, too nice, or too wounded to question what's really going on. Whitney Houston, despite her fame, was often surrounded by people who saw her only as a product. The ones who truly saw her heart were often pushed aside. You're the one who sees people clearly. And in doing so, you expose the dynamics that others are too enchanted to confront. That's why they fear you. You're not just outside their illusion, you break it. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. 1 Corinthians 2:15. You don't need someone to fall apart for you to recognize they've been fake all along. You felt the inconsistency in their energy the first time they smiled at you. You noticed when their tone didn't match their words. And you didn't call it out for attention, you simply observed, made peace with what you saw, and adjusted accordingly. Because the truth is, you don't chase charisma. You value consistency. You don't follow vibes, you follow truth. Think of Bozoma St. John, a powerful executive who's known for walking out of corporate spaces that didn't match her spirit. She never waited for public scandals to leave. She felt the dissonance and moved. You've learned that too. You don't need things to crash before you walk away. You trust your spirit, and manipulators hate that because it means you can't be cornered, bought, or blindfolded. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Echat John Arba, Echat. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you gave someone the benefit of the doubt and it cost you your peace? And how did it feel when you finally trusted your first impression instead of waiting for them to show you their worst? That's the shift you've made. You're not suspicious. You're discerning. You're not cold. You're clear. And in a room full of followers, you're the one who sees what others cheer for and quietly steps back. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the acclaimed Nigerian author, often speaks out against blind cultural loyalty and surface-level thinking. She doesn't follow trends, she questions them. That's what you do now. And manipulators, they can't lead someone who sees the truth before the lie finishes forming, for everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. Ephesians 5:13. So, when they say, you're different, take it as confirmation. You're not under the spell. You were never meant to be. And that's why they fear you, not because you challenged their power, but because you walked in and made it disappear. Number 8. You can't be flattered into submission. Chosen one. The reason they're frustrated is because their softest weapon failed on you, flattery. Manipulators don't always show up loud and toxic. Some arrive with charm, admiration, and compliments that seem sweet but are strategic. Their praise isn't pure, it's bait. They shower you with validation, not to honor you, but to disarm you. And with most people, it works. But you didn't take the bait, because you weren't hungry for attention. You already knew who you were. A flattering mouth works ruin. Proverbs 26:28. You've seen it before. Someone builds you up just so they can steer you. Compliments with strings attached. Praise that shifts into guilt the moment you say no. That's not love. It's manipulation dressed in sugar. Why do you think they looked so confused when their praise didn't melt you? They expected you to glow, to bend, to open the door and say, finally, someone sees me. But you were already seen by God. You don't crave visibility from those who use compliments as a leash. Taylor Swift has spoken openly about how public admiration often turned to public control, how praise was used to manipulate her image. She stopped performing for approval and started living for peace. You've done the same. Your worth is no longer outsourced. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Galatians 1:10. Let me ask you, how many times did praise lead to expectations you never agreed to? And how many of those supporters flipped when you didn't conform? That's why you're careful now. You don't absorb every nice word as truth. You observe. You ask yourself, does this feel genuine or strategic? You read timing. You feel motive. You listen for silence after the compliment. What aren't they saying? Maya Angelou once said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. But in your case, it's even deeper. When someone praises you too quickly, you look for the pattern, And that level of awareness protects your peace like armor. Whoever flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his feet. Proverbs 29:5. What they didn't understand is that your confidence isn't fed by applause, it's grown in alignment. They thought admiration would make you loyal. They assumed attention would buy your silence. But you've seen too many switch up after the first boundary. Too many smile before they sabotage. So now, you smile back, but you don't hand over trust. That's not cynicism. That's discernment. Keanu Reeves is often admired for being grounded despite constant praise. He doesn't absorb fame. He doesn't react to flattery. That's your posture now. They say nice things, and you don't respond with, "Wow, I'm amazing." You respond with, "Why now?" Because you've learned. You've watched too many admirers turn bitter the moment they couldn't control you. Let another praise you, and not your own mouth. A stranger, and not your own lips. Proverbs 27:2. So here's the truth. They're not angry because you rejected their compliment. They're angry because it didn't move you. You weren't softened. You weren't steered. You stayed solid. You stayed you. And when someone can't buy your loyalty with praise, they know they've lost the easiest form of control. When you no longer need to be liked, what kind of power do you walk in? The answer is unshakable authority. That's why they couldn't flatter you into submission, because your spirit is rooted. You're not impressed. You're aligned. And alignment will always outrank approval. Number 9. They hate you for exposing how fake their influence really is. God's chosen one. They are furious. And it's not because you shouted their secrets from rooftops or launched a public takedown. It's because you didn't flinch. You didn't kneel. You didn't play along. While everyone else was clapping for the performance, you folded your arms and looked deeper. You saw right through the well-rehearsed persona, the charming smiles, the veiled threats, the holy-sounding words with hollow intent. They built an empire on false influence, intimidation masked as leadership, manipulation dressed as wisdom, charm cloaked in spiritual authority. And all it took to collapse it was your refusal to submit. Have you ever wondered why your silence speaks louder than their sermons? Why does your calm presence threaten those who claim to be powerful? It's because true influence doesn't fear resistance, but theirs was never real to begin with. You exposed them not with accusation, but by clarity. You didn't need to fight fire with fire. You simply stopped giving them the fuel, and that's what dismantled their illusion. The truth is, manipulators are magicians of perception, but they crumble when someone sees past the smoke and mirrors. When you refused to clap, people began to question the performance. They began to whisper, "Why doesn't the chosen one follow them? Why aren't they impressed like the rest of us? What did they see that we missed?" And just like that, their power started to unravel. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11. You didn't need a pulpit to reveal them. Your discernment was a divine spotlight. And the closer people came to you, the more they noticed the cracks in the carefully crafted facade. Consider how Oprah Winfrey once exposed manipulative behavior within media and spirituality by simply choosing truth over glamour. Think about how Elon Musk, despite being polarizing, often dismantled long-standing corporate illusions by refusing to conform. Princess Diana quietly rejected the strict, polished act of royalty, and the world saw the institution differently because of it. You carry that same disruptive power, but does that mean you sought their downfall? No, it means you lived in truth, and the truth disrupted their kingdom of lies. Your clarity is contagious. Your refusal to be fooled became a silent signal to others. You don't have to obey illusion. You can walk away too. And that terrifies them. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you. For that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. Luke 6:26. They were addicted to praise, obsessed with image. But when your life stood as a mirror, it reflected what they worked so hard to hide. Their leadership was never built on truth. It was built on emotional coercion, guilt, fear, and pretense. And now that you've broken their favorite weapon, approval seeking, they are scrambling to keep the illusion alive. Martin Luther King Jr. faced the same resistance when he refused to bow to unjust systems. His very presence made people question the integrity of those in power, like him. Your stance doesn't just set you apart. It starts a quiet revolution. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. You, chosen one, are that light. And here's the part they'll never admit: they didn't just lose control over you. They lost the ability to control others who saw you choose freedom. Their carefully managed circle is unraveling. And it started with your no. Your spiritual immunity, your refusal to play the game, became divine rebellion. And your rebellion wasn't loud. It was sacred. Like Brené Brown says, authenticity is a daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be. That's what you've done. You let go of the version they needed you to be, and in doing so, you became dangerous to their deception. So let me ask you this: what else are you exposing by simply being who you are? Who's watching you right now and silently realizing they, too, have the power to walk away? You became a mirror, and mirrors don't preach, they reveal. You will know them by their fruits. Matthew 7:16. And now, the fruit of their so-called leadership is rotten in plain sight. You didn't cause the collapse. You just stopped holding up the illusion. And that truth, that's what they'll never forgive. Because when someone's identity is built on illusion, the one who sees through it becomes the ultimate threat. Number 10. You can't be guilt-tripped into self-betrayal anymore. They're spiraling now. Chosen one, and it's because their favorite weapon no longer works on you: guilt. Once upon a time, they could twist your empathy like wet clay. They could manipulate your compassion until you were sacrificing your health, peace, and purpose just to keep the peace. They disguised control as care. They masked domination with doctrine. But now they can't make you betray yourself just to soothe their insecurity. Have you noticed how mad they get when no is no longer negotiable? How angry they seem when you prioritize peace over performance? That's not coincidence. That's the sound of a control system falling apart. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm. Then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1. You're no longer under the emotional yoke. The guilt game used to run deep. They'd say, "Isn't that prideful?" Or, "Aren't you being selfish when you chose rest, boundaries, or solitude?" But you've learned that protecting your mental, spiritual, and emotional clarity isn't pride, it's preservation. It's obedience to the God who dwells in your temple. Meghan Markle, for instance, walked away from royal expectations, not because she wanted attention, but because she recognized the emotional toll of performance over authenticity. You, too, walked away from emotional slavery, disguised as service. Let's ask the hard question. Why did they only love your yes? Why was your no treated like betrayal? It's because your compliance was their currency. Your willingness to overextend gave them unearned authority, and once you reclaimed your power, the transaction was over. No more spiritual blackmail, no more confusing self-abandonment with Christ-likeness. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Matthew 5:37. Jesus never told you to destroy yourself for the comfort of manipulators. He said, be clear, be firm, be grounded in truth. And now that you are, their entire emotional economy is crashing. Think about how Simone Biles stood up and said, "No more," during the Olympics. She refused to break her body to meet other people's expectations, and in doing so, redefined what strength looks like. You've done the same spiritually. Your refusal to carry guilt that doesn't belong to you is a prophetic act of self-respect, and that drives them mad. Because once guilt doesn't work, they have no access. Once you stop explaining yourself, their games end. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. You're guarding your heart now, not out of coldness, but out of sacred clarity, and they know it. Selena Gomez once said, "I'm not going to let other people's opinions of who I should be stop me from being who I am." That's where you are now. Chosen one. You've dropped the guilt. You've stopped apologizing for needing space, stillness, truth. And by doing so, you've disrupted an entire system of emotional entitlement. Because your peace is no longer a public resource, it's divine property. Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close. Psalm 27:10. That's your anchor. That's your defense against the false guilt they once used to keep you small. So let me ask, what would happen if more people dropped the guilt like you did? How many spiritual systems would fall if everyone realized guilt is not God? You've stopped self-betrayal, and in doing so, you've become a living testimony of what God's freedom looks like in real time. They didn't expect you to choose yourself, but now they have to reckon with it, and that is why they can't sleep. Number 11. They fear you because you no longer abandon yourself just to keep the peace, and that terrifies them. God's chosen ones. For manipulators to operate effectively, they need one thing: your silence. They depend on your discomfort with confrontation, on your fear of being seen as too much, too sensitive, or too difficult. For years, you might have swallowed your truth just to maintain peace. You stayed quiet in moments that begged for your voice. You nodded in agreement when every fiber of your spirit screamed, no. You contorted yourself to fit into dynamics that only rewarded your compliance. But the version of you that used to sacrifice authenticity for approval no longer exists. What changed? You did. You finally realized that pretending everything is fine just to avoid conflict is not peace, it's personal imprisonment. And the day you stopped abandoning yourself to protect other people's comfort was the day their power over you broke. Have you ever asked yourself, what if the real war isn't out there but inside? When I choose betrayal of self over uncomfortable truth, that question shifted everything for you. Now, you don't see conflict as the enemy. You see disconnection from your own spirit as the greater danger. Your peace no longer relies on whether the room is calm. It's rooted in whether your soul is aligned. And when you made that internal shift, manipulators panicked. Why? Because their entire strategy is built on your fear of disapproval, your dread of being misunderstood, your anxiety about rejection. But you've grown tired of paying the price for false peace. Even public figures like Meghan Markle have spoken openly about the emotional cost of constantly trying to be palatable for others. Her stepping back from royal life was a declaration: I refuse to betray myself for appearances. Like her, you've crossed a sacred boundary. You now understand that loyalty to your own truth is worth every awkward silence, every disapproving look, and every door that slams shut behind you. So when you finally said, "Let them be uncomfortable, I'm not lying to myself anymore," everything shifted. The control they had was severed the moment you decided your life wasn't up for negotiation. As Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That renewal has already taken place within you, and now you're no longer triggered by silence. You don't chase apologies that never come. You don't crumble under passive-aggressive sighs or emotional withdrawal. You stand your ground, even when you stand alone. And that kind of power cannot be manipulated. It terrifies them, because it means they can no longer bait you with guilt or twist you with shame. Think of someone like Prince, an artist who refused to change his name, sound, or message just to fit the industry's mold. He stayed true to his vision, even when it cost him labels, contracts, and fame. And in the end, his authenticity made him iconic. What are you willing to lose to be fully yourself? And, more importantly, what are you no longer willing to lose, like your peace, your identity, your voice? Galatians 1:10 asks, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings, or of God, or am I trying to please people? That's the crossroad every chosen one must face. You've chosen divine alignment over human applause. And in doing so, you've become immovable in spirit. This frightens manipulators because they realize your responses are no longer theirs to control. Even in the world of activism, figures like Malala Yousafzai refused to stay quiet despite life-threatening pressure. She wouldn't water down her message to keep the peace, and neither do you. You've understood the sacred truth. If keeping peace requires you to disappear, then it's not peace, it's control, masquerading as unity. You've outgrown roles that ask you to shrink, and now you wear your full self with unapologetic strength. Philippians 4:7 reminds us. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That's the kind of peace you walk in now, one that doesn't beg for human understanding because it's already rooted in divine approval. So when others label you rebellious, stubborn, or unyielding, remind yourself, no, this is not rebellion. This is resurrection. This is restoration. This is what it looks like when someone finally refuses to go missing inside their own life. Number 12. They can't control someone whose identity is no longer on lease, and that's why they fear you. Chosen one. The people who once manipulated you are now confused. You used to be flexible, adaptable, emotionally adjustable. They could guilt you into changing your mind or flatter you into questioning your boundaries. Why doesn't that work anymore? Because your identity is no longer rented, it's owned. You did the inner work most people run from. You looked in the mirror and refused to flinch at what you saw. You confronted your wounds, healed your history, and reclaimed the parts of yourself you once gave away for acceptance. Now, you don't need to be told who you are. You know who you are. And that terrifies those who depended on your uncertainty. When was the last time you asked yourself, what have I been giving away just to be liked? That question alone starts to dismantle manipulation, because manipulators feed off those who still crave external validation. But you've stopped auditioning for worth. You've stopped molding yourself to fit in. And that's why you no longer play their roles, because you've walked off their stage completely. Look at Oprah Winfrey, who grew up in poverty, facing abuse and rejection, and yet eventually anchored herself in a solid identity, not because the world validated her, but because she did. Her success couldn't be bought or shaped by the industry because she already knew her value. Similarly, your spiritual maturity has made you unmalleable. You no longer need people to define you, and that means they can't manipulate you. As Ephesians 14 state, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, but instead, speaking the truth in love. We will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body. That's who you've become, someone not easily shaken, no longer tossed by others' opinions, so when they approach with flattery, guilt, threats, or silence, it falls flat. Why? Because your foundation isn't built on external scaffolding, it's internal, it's spiritual, and it's unshakable. Even Nelson Mandela, during decades of imprisonment, refused to let others define his value. He could have easily internalized the world's labels: criminal, threat, outsider, but instead, he rooted himself in identity. And that identity later led to liberation. What would it cost you to reclaim that same kind of rootedness in your life? And are you willing to face the backlash that comes with being unbothered? Proverbs 29-25 warns us, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. That's the safety you now operate in. You've learned that being agreeable isn't the same as being in alignment. You don't shapeshift anymore. You don't chase seats at tables that require you to shrink. And because of that, they no longer have the tools to manipulate you. Their old tricks don't work. Their power plays fall apart. Because you're no longer hungry for their crumbs, you're already full-on divine identity. Consider Maya Angelou, who declared, "I belong everywhere I go, and nowhere at all." That's the paradox of the chosen. You walk through the world grounded, even when you don't fit in. And it's that inner ownership that makes you immune to manipulation, because you're not waiting for applause, invitation, or validation to confirm your worth. God already did. Jeremiah 17:7 declares, "But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in Him." Your confidence isn't on loan. It's not for sale. It's not shaped by trends or approval. It's anchored in something eternal. That's why you're dangerous now. That's why they can't move you, mold you, or manage you. Because you no longer walk into rooms wondering how to fit in. You walk in knowing you already belong, whether they know it or not. So, chosen one, don't shrink back. Don't explain your growth to those who never wanted you to own yourself in the first place. They're not confused, they're confronted. Because in a world where everyone's trying to be liked, you've chosen to be real. And real is untouchable. Number 13. You've learned the difference between loyalty and spiritual slavery, and now they're losing control. Chosen one. You no longer confuse loyalty with bondage, and that shift in your spirit is setting people off. Manipulators used to count on your heart being bigger than your boundaries. They assumed your compassion could be turned into compliance, but not anymore. You've come too far. You've outgrown their emotional chains. You see now that loyalty isn't supposed to cost your identity, your freedom, or your peace. So why do they still act like your refusal to stay silent is betrayal? That's because to a manipulator, loyalty has never been about love. It's about power. They expected you to nod while they lied, to smile while they caused harm, and to stay put while your spirit suffocated. Have you ever wondered why some people only celebrate your loyalty when it benefits them, but curse you when you speak the truth. That's because what they called loyalty was really submission disguised as devotion. They hoped that by appealing to your sense of faithfulness, they could control you without ever having to change. But you're different now. You've redefined what it means to be loyal. You've turned inward, and you've anchored that word in your soul, not their approval. Your loyalty is now guided by God, not guilt. Your heart may still love deeply, but your discernment refuses to participate in dysfunction. And that, chosen one, terrifies them. Why? Because you can still care and yet walk away. You can pray for them and still block their access. You can forgive them and still protect yourself. That kind of spiritual clarity breaks their manipulation every time. The Bible says in Proverbs 4:23, Abu Va'alels, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Guarding your heart doesn't mean you're disloyal. It means you're finally aligned with God's boundaries for your life. And when you started doing that, they panicked. Because, for manipulators, loyalty was never mutual. It was one-sided servitude. They expected your silence, your sacrifice, your support, even while they shattered your confidence. And the moment you stopped letting fear drive your choices, you stepped into a power they can no longer reach. Think of the story of Princess Diana. She was loyal to the crown, but not to the point of losing her voice. When she saw the deception, the coldness, and the double standards, she chose to step out, not because she hated the institution, but because she chose to honor herself. And that decision shook an empire, just like you. Chosen one. She learned that real loyalty doesn't mean dying quietly in a place that refuses to nurture you. Have you ever stayed in something too long just because you didn't want to be seen as the bad one? Maybe it was a relationship, a job, or even a church that manipulated you with guilt, history, or family ties. But one day, you heard God's whisper, enough. That whisper didn't come with thunder. It came with stillness, and in that moment, your loyalty shifted from people to purpose, from performance to peace. Luke 14:26 reminds us, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. This isn't about hating people. It's about recognizing that no relationship, no memory, no emotional tie should ever outrank your loyalty to your divine calling. Your soul is not a bargaining chip for someone else's comfort. Let's talk about Chadwick Boseman, a man who suffered silently with terminal cancer while still showing up powerfully for his calling. Behind the scenes, he endured incredible pain, but he remained loyal to his mission, not to the public's expectations. He didn't explain or defend himself. When people criticized his weight or absence, he stayed rooted in truth. Chosen one. That's the level of integrity you've stepped into. You no longer serve optics. You serve obedience. They're furious because they can't guilt you anymore. They try to throw your past sacrifices in your face. After all I've done for you, they say. But real loyalty doesn't come with manipulation receipts. You did what you did because your heart was pure, not because you were blind. And the moment you realized that staying in something toxic didn't prove faithfulness, it proved fear, you were set free. Can you see how many times fear disguised itself as loyalty in your life? Dutimotivianas. Septinis says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. That sound mind is what you're operating from now. You no longer equate endurance with virtue. You no longer view suffering as proof of love. You now understand that loyalty to others should never require betrayal of self. That truth alone, spoken through your actions, is what's breaking their entire strategy. Remember Selena Gomez? At one point, her loyalty to certain relationships was killing her health, her peace, and her voice. But when she chose to walk away, not out of hatred, but healing, her entire energy shifted, and that choice birthed new music, new purpose, and a whole new level of influence. The same thing is happening for you. You're entering your becoming season, the one that only arrives after your breaking free season. John Kahdeksan, 32 promises. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And the truth is, chosen one, you were never disloyal. You were just done being used, done being blamed, done being silenced. They thought your loyalty meant ownership, but now they know it meant love. And real love sets limits. They'll try to spin the narrative. They'll say you're selfish, cold, fake, or even rebellious. But underneath that outrage is fear. Fear that their control over you is gone forever. Fear that their version of you, the one who kept quiet, who accepted crumbs, who tolerated dishonor, has died. And they're right. That version no longer exists. Think about Simone Biles, who withdrew from Olympic competition, not because she couldn't perform, but because she chose mental health over external pressure. The world called her weak, but the wise knew she was strong. She taught us that sometimes walking away is the bravest kind of loyalty to self, to God, and to destiny, just like you. Chosen one. Galatians 1:10 asks, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings, or of God, or am I trying to please people? If I was still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. You've made your answer clear. You please God now. And when your soul got louder than their accusations, they realized their grip had shattered. That's what really breaks them. They no longer own your silence. Your love no longer equals your submission, and your peace is no longer for sale. Lastly, think of Malala Yousafzai. She loved her country, her culture, or her family, but she refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. Her loyalty was never about obedience, it was about truth. And because of that, millions now rise with her voice. Chosen one. The moment you chose your soul over their comfort, you too became a voice they could no longer silence. Isaías 50:7 declares, because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore, I have set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame. That's where you are now, resolute, anchored, and no longer afraid of being misunderstood, because real loyalty doesn't fear backlash. It fears disobedience to God. And you, chosen one, have been loyal to the right thing. This time you're calling. That's why their manipulation no longer works. Because your soul has remembered who it belongs to. Number 14. They realize the only way to control you is to become honest. And that's the one thing they can't do. There came a shift in you that flipped their entire strategy on its head. See, the old version of you. You gave chances. You extended grace. You waited for the truth. Even when your gut already knew it. You tried to be fair, to be loyal, to be kind. But now, things are different. Now, they look at you and realize the only door left open requires something they've spent their whole life avoiding. Honesty, not half-truths, not emotional manipulation, not carefully crafted performances, just raw, sincere truth. And that alone terrifies them, because they no longer know how to control you unless you're confused, codependent, or craving their validation. What do manipulators do when their favorite weapon, deception, stops working? What do they become when they realize the mask must fall or the connection will die? This is why they're scrambling. You don't react the same way anymore. You don't try to make excuses for their inconsistent behavior. You don't send follow-up messages asking, "Did I do something wrong?" You don't chase. You don't clarify what doesn't need clarification. You've stopped playing tug-of-war with people who drop the rope the minute they saw you stop begging. Instead, you've drawn a line that isn't made of ultimatums or threats. It's made of energy. And that energy is solid, sacred, and non-negotiable. You've made it clear, access to you now requires authenticity, and they feel it. Not in your words, but in your stillness, not in confrontation, but in your disinterest. Think about it, how many people were only close to you because they didn't have to be real? How many kept you in orbit with just enough attention, just enough vulnerability, just enough illusion to keep you hooked? But now, you're no longer available for the performance. You want what's real, or nothing at all. And to manipulators, that requirement is like a foreign language, because their entire identity is built on image management, not soul integrity. It's not that they can't be honest. It's that honesty would dismantle the lies they've used to survive. And your presence now demands what their ego can't provide. Let's make it plain. Many people were only comfortable around you because they could feed you crumbs and still be celebrated. But now you're not even hungry for crumbs. You've set the table of your own worth. You've made peace a lifestyle, not a negotiation. And it shows. Your energy exposes what's fake without you having to speak. Your boundaries speak louder than their justifications. Have you noticed how some people avoid you now, but still keep your name in their mouth? They're not mad because you're unkind. They're mad because you won't go back to who they could manipulate. Real-life example? Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." She lived it. After surviving extreme trauma, she became a force of honesty and spiritual integrity. She didn't tolerate fake apologies or conditional love. She walked away from deals, relationships, and people who couldn't meet her in truth. And the world didn't just respect her, they revered her. Because truth, when embodied, becomes undeniable. Second example, actor Keanu Reeves. A man known for his humility and honesty. He avoids the Hollywood scene that thrives on manipulation. He's walked away from major studio deals simply because they didn't align with his values. That same quiet clarity, it's the energy you now carry, not loud, but immovable. Third example, Princess Diana. The world adored her, but behind palace walls, she faced manipulation, gaslighting, and betrayal. When she finally broke the silence in her famous BBC interview, she told the raw truth about her marriage, her pain, her strength. It shocked the world, and it also cost her everything. But in that moment, she traded approval for freedom, and that is the same choice you've made, time and time again. And fourth, there's Nelson Mandela. He was imprisoned for 27 years by a system that tried to break his will, twist his truth, and distort his cause. But he emerged not bitter, not dishonest, not manipulative, but clearer than ever. He never lowered his integrity to match the system's lies. He became proof that truth, when held long enough, always outlasts control. So let me ask you, How many people have silently exited your life, not because you were wrong, but because you were right and refused to bend? How many had to walk away because they realized your presence now requires depth, healing, accountability? You didn't reject them. You just stopped shrinking for them. You stopped bending your intuition just to preserve the bond. You stopped trading your truth for temporary peace. And that, to a manipulator, is war. The Bible says in Proverbs 12:22, "The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy." You've become someone God delights in, not because you're perfect, but because you're honest. And that scares people who built their comfort on your silence. Ephesians 4:25 reminds us. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. For we are all members of one body. When you began living this verse, when your standard became truth and nothing less, it revealed who was never walking in the same spirit. And John 8:13 declares, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." What they didn't understand is that your freedom was never in their hands. It was hidden inside the clarity you dared to claim. Every time you said, "That doesn't feel right," or "That's not who I am anymore," you were breaking chains. Every time you stopped explaining yourself, you were reclaiming your soul. Galatians 1:10 poses a question that every chosen one must eventually confront. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings, or of God, or am I trying to please people? You've answered that with your evolution. You're no longer trying to keep the peace with people who thrive in confusion. You're not here to be digestible. You're here to be divinely aligned. Let's be honest. The reason they whisper behind your back is because they've lost access. The reason they twist the narrative is because their role in your story ended. They can't follow you into your healing unless they're willing to heal too, and that's the part they avoid. They'd rather call you cold than admit they were never real. They'd rather say you've changed than confess they never intended to. But don't shrink. Don't go back. Because every manipulator has one thing in common. They fear the moment you require truth. And you, chosen one, have become the very thing they can't fake their way past. You didn't evolve to be cold. You evolved to be clear. You didn't leave to punish them. You walked away to protect your peace. And now they're left standing outside, facing the one test they never prepared for: being real. And if they still find honesty too expensive, let them go, broke trying, because you're building something eternal, and it's made of truth. Beloved chosen one, if this message stirred something deep in your soul, if you've ever had to walk away from people who couldn't meet you with honesty, if you've outgrown manipulation and reclaimed your peace, then I want you to know you are not alone. This space was created for souls like yours, those who've done the hard work, stood their ground, and chosen truth over comfort. You are the reason this message exists. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for walking this path of growth and healing with me. Please take a moment to comment below and let me know what part hit home the most for you. I read every one of your breakthroughs, and they bless me deeply. If someone in your life is still tangled in confusion, still handing their power to manipulators, share this message with them. It might be the clarity they didn't know they needed. And if you feel led to support this channel and mission through a super thanks donation, I know that your generosity helps this message continue to reach and uplift more chosen ones around the world. But even if you don't donate it, please hear me clearly. I'm still endlessly grateful for your presence, your time, and your spirit. Just by watching, commenting, and growing with me, you are already a blessing. So, until next time, stay anchored in your truth. Stay brave in your healing. Stay bold in your refusal to shrink for anyone's comfort. May God cover you in strength, in wisdom, and in divine protection. I speak blessings over your path, breakthroughs over your decisions, and joy over every step forward. You are not just surviving, you're evolving. And I'll see you in the next message. God bless you always.